All right, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to our 8th and final session on volunteer management in recovery community organizations. Today, we're going to talk about recognizing and retaining volunteers, and we have Danielle Brady with us. This is our funding disclaimer from SAMHSA for the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. So the views stated today, any materials views are not necessarily the views of SAMHSA and are those solely of the presenter. Next slide. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording our presentations and those will be posted to the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence website. When you are not speaking, please be sure to keep your line muted. When you do speak, identify yourself by name to help others recognize who you are. Feel free throughout the presentation to submit any questions into the chat box, and the presenter Danielle will keep an eye on that along with Wendy and I to make sure that your questions get answered. And then we do have our Learning Collaborative landing page. And so all materials and recordings are available through that. Cindy sends it out usually the day before each session. So I know I received the email yesterday. If you're not receiving those emails, feel free to connect with Cindy or I in the chat and we'll get you connected. Next slide. One back. Thank you. Very important information. If we want addiction destigmatized, we need to use a language that's unified. So this is about the fact that language matters, and we want to refrain from using stigmatizing language or describing somebody as their disease or diagnosis. Number one, they're a person first, so we want to use their name and identify them that way. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Danielle. And yeah, take it away. Thank you.
All right, thank you, and thanks for having me. If you and Wendy don't mind keeping an eye on the chat, I am a terrible multitasker on Zoom. So if I start looking at the chat, I will go into, I'll start getting distracted. I get very distracted. So let me know if there's any questions or anything that I need to know about. My name is Danielle Brady. I've been working with volunteers for over 25 years, and I have been leading volunteers for about 20 of those years. I have been a part of MAVA since 2008 and a trainer and on the board, and I'm excited to be here today. This is one of my favorite modules, as although all the other modules that you've done definitely have something to do with retaining volunteers. Recognizing volunteers is definitely one of the most important ways to retain volunteers. And it's one of the funnest parts, I think, of our job. Research has found that retention is directly linked to retaining volunteers. So, and retaining can be tricky, right? Because I think we used to think that retaining volunteers for as long as we could is what the goal was. But now, I think we're leaning more towards retaining volunteers as long as they're engaged. Once they're not engaged, let's just part ways. If you're both engaged, it's a win-win. And so I think that's the goal in the end. Okay, so in the chat, if you can answer this question, what's the connection between recognizing volunteers and retaining volunteers? I told you a little bit, but in your own words, how do you think they affect each other? Volunteers like their work, has value for the organization, absolutely. Anyone else? Anyone else want to share what they think? If volunteers aren't recognized, there's not much incentive to stay, right? If you think about your own volunteer experiences, if you have them, if you go somewhere and you feel like you weren't really helpful, they didn't really care, what's the incentive to go back? Bringing awareness to all the work they do, yes, and the impact. That's one of the most important things, I would say. All right, anyone else? Okay. So let's move on. Well, all right, so, oops, I gotta close this chat here. So the impact of recognition on retaining volunteers. Volunteer management practices with the greatest influence on retention. Number one, recognition activities. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. And then there's some other things that from the other modules also. Training, professional development for volunteers. This is super important, especially in my opinion, at the beginning, at orientation. Training them not only on the job they're going to do and their job description and what you expect of them, but also about who you're working with. And the lived experience of the people you're working with. I was in a workshop actually for MAVA not too long ago, and somebody said, you know, we keep losing volunteers because they were working with teens that were either maybe they didn't have a home, or maybe they were single parents and having a lot going on in life, experiencing poverty. And they're like, and you know, volunteers aren't showing up because they're just irritated, because when they show up, a lot of times the teens don't show up. So I asked her, do you educate your volunteers on the lived experience of those teens? Because if you did that from the beginning, then you might, maybe you switch their perspective to, oh, okay, so they're going through all this stuff, they might not show up, and then have a backup for them to do when they don't. But I think it's super important to train volunteers on that, but I'm sure you all talked about training already. And then screening volunteers and matching assignments. Is it a fit? Is it a fit for you both? It's not only a fit for the volunteers, but it needs to be a fit for the organization too. I think we're getting away from, we'll take whoever we can, right? Like, has to be a win-win for you, because we don't want to start creating positions just that aren't really helpful for us and our organization. Okay. So our learning objectives for today: identify personal and organizational barriers to giving volunteer recognition, explore ways of giving formal and informal recognition within organizations, brainstorm creative recognition ideas, items, and acknowledgements, different ways that we can recognize our volunteers. It's not a one size fits all. Review essential guidelines for effective recognition, and then understand what volunteer retention, or that volunteer retention develops from strong volunteer engagement practices. So those are our learning objectives for the day. So we're going to start with, next slide, recognizing volunteers. Feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it. Recognition is a win-win for everyone. It's fun to give it, and it's definitely fun to receive it as a volunteer, well, as a staff member too, right? As a person, it's great to feel recognized and appreciated. Okay, so let's do a breakout group for the next slide. And how many people do we have total? 12, looks like. So let's just do partners, groups of 2. And let's take a couple minutes. Let's take let's do 5 minutes and think about volunteer recognition in your life, and really recognition in general. What kind you've received, how meaningful was it, and why, and how did the recognition make you feel? What did you learn about recognition as you listened to it? And then we'll talk about what we learned from each other briefly.
You're setting up those rooms, Wendy? Cool, thank you. Did we say how long they're spending? A couple minutes?
5 minutes.
Cool, cool, cool. Danielle, where, oh, I'm gonna, just so we don't miss it.
And they've got about 26 seconds left. And Danielle, I'll let you know when everybody's back.
Great, thank you.
All right, everybody should be back now.
Great. Okay, so if anyone is brave enough to share, what did you learn about recognition as you listen to the other participants tell about their experiences with it? Can I get one person at least to share anything that they learned?
I don't mind. I'm Sarah. I'm with RAW, which is a recovery community organization here in Monroe County, Michigan. So one thing that sounded like it was pretty beneficial for volunteers was items of recognition. So like I was in a group with Ellen and Donna, and Ellen shared that she received pins and dinners and t-shirts for like number of hours of service performed. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. So it's kind of like the golden rule, right? Treat others how you want to be treated. But when it comes to recognition with volunteers, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to challenge you to practice the platinum rule, right? Which is treat others how they want to be treated. It's hard for us to assume that everyone wants what we want, and everyone's an individual. And I know, especially with large groups of volunteers, we can't necessarily do every single individual. But in certain cases you can. So key concept number one, recognition must be meaningful to the recipient and be updated to reflect changes in how volunteers like to be recognized, depending on what their role is and who they are. So let's go to the next slide. So these slides were made for in-person, so we're not going to just keep breaking out into activities, although I do think it's important to talk about these things. So is anyone willing to share in the chat what hasn't worked for volunteer recognition, and what changes have you noticed as far as what people like for recognition? I know, like I said, I've been in this volunteer leadership for 20 years, and it used to be, God, I sound old, don't I? It used to be that volunteers really liked formal recognition. They liked galas, and like I remember us having, the board would host a gala, or a gala for volunteers to come. And when I first started, it was the most popular thing. And then as time went on, less and less people showed up. And it was just a switch in what people were interested in. So you have to pay attention to that and listen to those changes. Does anyone have any examples of what hasn't worked when recognizing volunteers that they're willing to share? Anyone? No? Another change I have noticed in my time is, sorry. Well, it kind of goes along with the galas, but just informal recognition in general. The day-to-day is more important, I think, than it used to be. So let's move on.
Danielle, I did want to say, someone commented, I found that there is sometimes jealousy amongst volunteer recognition. And then another comment, I don't feel like simple thank you and we appreciate you go that far when the volunteer's time isn't that structured or directed. So two kind of separate comments.
Okay, so let's just chat about those just for a minute. So I'll bring up the chat so I can read these again. I found that there's sometimes jealousy. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is that like, it seems like a popularity contest, like, oh, we recognized Jane Doe up on the screen or in social media, and then another person come to you and say like, oh, I saw Jane was recognized again, like that type of thing?
Exactly. It seems like sometimes, one volunteer may do something extraordinary, so you give them a specific recognition, like, at a quarterly meeting, you bring them up, give them a gift certificate. And then the next recognition may not be as great or profound, and you'll hear the chatter that, oh, well, so and so got this. She got, a $50 gift card, or all I got was a shout out in a monthly newsletter. So it's very hard to compete with that, especially when the merits don't warrant the same recognition. So sometimes that jealousy kind of sometimes hinders you from being able to participate the way you really want to with all of the volunteers.
That is very interesting and true. I think that is true. But I do think that you're right, though. Like there's some things that deserve a little bit more of a call out. That really, oh my gosh, we couldn't have done this without you. We would have fallen on our face without you. Where this other littler thing is like, we're very grateful for that too, but it's not the same. I think that is a good example. What about you, Cynthia?
So as a newer organization, we haven't really developed a volunteer recognition program, but it really, and I wrote it in the chat, it really does help me to hear, what has been, what's the current trend, and, hearing feedback from the group and reading it in the chat on what's new in recognition for volunteers. I was in a group in the room with Laura, and we were talking about this, and she's like, an experience that she had as a volunteer, and I don't want to take the story away from her, but I do want to I think it's important. She said, sometimes it's not about what you get, it's how you're treated.
Yeah.
If you're treated with disrespect, it doesn't matter how much accolades you get for the work you did, you're still treated with disrespect.
True.
Right? So I think it's a lot of learning. It really is for me a lot of learning, and because we're at the very infancy stages, this provides a really good opportunity to get my wheel turning here.
Yeah, the exciting thing, Cynthia, is being at the beginning stages, because you get to create an environment or a culture of appreciation if you want to. Like you can, like these little thank yous. And Laura, I want to hear from you briefly, because I think I'm curious about what you mean, a simple thank you and we appreciate you. Doesn't seem to go that far. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's just more kind of, from personal experience at our organization. So we don't really have like a structured volunteer program. And so kind of like anyone who wants to volunteer, we kind of like find something for them to do for the most part. So sometimes people come in, and they're just kind of like sitting around and observing, and we'll take people around and be like, oh, this is Lisa, she's here to volunteer. And it's like, oh my God, thank you. We need people like you. And then she goes and sits for 2 hours doing nothing. So it's kind of like, if there's no like purpose or real mission in what they're doing, it's just like saying thank you and you're awesome and you mean everything to us is kind of like falls flat, I think.
Oh, for sure. I agree. Feeling utilized and in a way that that you're making impact is number one thing volunteers want. They do not want to come in and sit, for sure. And Cynthia was starting from the beginning. If you start the thank yous and the appreciation right away, and volunteers are important, not an add-on or, oh, they're just volunteers. Like that should not be said. You can create a culture of appreciation right away. Okay, so let's talk about, thank you all for sharing. Let's talk about all the trends right now in volunteer recognition. So increasingly, volunteers appreciate hearing the impact of their work. So like I'll send out a newsletter type of thing monthly, and it will, anything that's new, keep them up to date so they feel a part of something, part of the volunteer community, but also the impact they've made in the last month. Oh my gosh, we have made this many meals, we've done this many deliveries, and more than numbers, how that affects our clients, and then add like a quote of our partners or clients or who we work with. Education sessions about the cause of the organization addresses. This is really important. Like I said, training from the beginning of the lived experiences of who you are working with is important for volunteers. There was a study done by, or it was in this, there's 2020 Spink Tank, and it was called, Dr. Rebecca Jackson did a study, and she works for the federal government working with volunteers. And she found that 46% of her volunteers said that they had perception change because of their volunteer experience. That is a huge opportunity for us, for people to see people with, whether it's disease, living in poverty, whatever the mission is, to be able to see the lived experience in a different way. We can change the world. I really think so. So it's important to have that education. Training to build new skills. Sometimes people are using right now, their volunteer experience for their resumes. Promote and move to a higher level of responsibility. This creates ownership, which is good. And sometimes it can be a little challenging, but if they have more ownership, they're more likely they're willing to show up, do the work, and be consistent and dedicated. And then the personal thank you continues to be popular. Handwritten cards are still the #1 most appreciated thing for volunteers. Okay, next. So there's a Canadian study done a few years back, I think 2013, if I remember right. Top 2 ways volunteers want to be recognized. 80% like to be thanked by hearing about how their work has made a difference, so the impact they have made. And close to 70% like to be recognized by being thanked in person or an ongoing, those more informal basis. Is becoming more popular, I would say. But there are gaps between how organizations are recognizing volunteers and how volunteers want to be recognized. In your handouts, there's links to a video and to the study. You can read a little bit more about it. It's pretty fascinating though. I was gonna play the video, but I think that we're gonna move forward because we're a little bit, we have a lot of info to get through and I want to make sure we get through it all. Okay, next slide. So this is the interesting part, is that close to 50% of organizations are using public methods such as media, galas, and placing ads, but less than 20% of those volunteers want that. Interesting, right? So organizations are just assuming what they want, what volunteers want, instead of asking them. Next slide. So the key strategy is ask, send out. I do a couple of things. One, when people sign up, one of the questions on the application, I believe it is, or orientation, is how do you like to be recognized? Volunteers of different ages, cultural backgrounds, and socioeconomic backgrounds, geographic areas, etc., may desire different types of recognition. Some cultures do not want to be called out in public. Some want to be private or just want their family to know, about their good work. So offering multiple recognition opportunities to meet the needs of more volunteers. So consider, in addition to a large appreciation event, which will draw some people, you could host multiple, maybe lunch, brunch, lunch and learns we do sometimes, that are smaller and more informal. So diversify your recognition strategies to try to catch everyone. And sometimes you can get really great ideas from your volunteers. I like, you know what I really like? One that I got from my volunteers was something useful in their volunteer opportunity, which I really thought was interesting. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. So different, and different volunteer opportunities have different motivations also. So keeping that in mind, right? Like we have kitchen volunteers that are in our kitchen, chopping vegetables and packing meals. We work with we prepare meals, package them, and deliver them to people with life-threatening illnesses. And volunteers do all the work. So we're not volunteer supported, we are volunteer driven. We can't do what we do without volunteers. So the people in the kitchen, there's two kinds of volunteers in the kitchen. There's task-oriented and there's community-oriented or relationship-oriented. So the task-oriented people, which we learn who they are, we try to put them at the same table, want to get as much done as possible. Much done as possible, like no time to talk. We're doing a job here, right? And the community or relationship-based people are there for the community and talking, and they're like chopping 1 carrot an hour because they're chatting. We make room for that. We don't on purpose. We don't focus on how much we're getting done. We know that half of our mission is creating this community. But then we have our delivery volunteers. See, kitchen volunteers, task-oriented or relationship-oriented. Our delivery volunteers are face-to-face with our client. They want to be face-to-face with the client. They don't necessarily want to come in the building and have the whole community. They want to see the impact of what they're doing immediately. So keeping those things in mind also. Okay, next slide. Okay, so key strategy choices for in-person events take into account dietary preferences and potential conflicts like religious holidays or various faiths. When you're coming up with a date for a gala or anything, always look at the calendar and see what dates, if there's any religious holidays that day, even if it's not the one you celebrate, somebody may be celebrating it. When offering giveaways, consider what it's meaningful to different volunteers. Some may appreciate a t-shirt or notebook, while others might be more appreciative of just a card. And you can offer choices too. And like I said, useful in their role. Let me give you an example. So we have delivery bags. They're plastic bags, like imagine like a large Target plastic bag, and they're kind of heavy. So we bought these, I don't know if you can see. These are little holders that you slip the bag in here, and it's like a handle on there. So it's easier for them to do their job as a volunteer. Another one is for our decade volunteers. We gave them aprons so that when they're in our kitchen, they have an apron. It says an apron is a cape on backwards, and Open Arms Decade Club or superhero. So this is an apron that they can wear with pride in our kitchen. And a lot of times it starts a conversation like, wow, you've been here for 10 years. What was it like back then? Or whatever. So something they can utilize is another choice. Next slide. Okay, key concept number 2. Recognition is an ongoing integral part of volunteer management process. Like I said, it should be try to make it a part of the culture where everyone is grateful for volunteers and welcoming to volunteers, that you can feel it when you walk in the door. I have volunteers sometimes say like, oh my gosh, I had 4 people thank me today. And I'm like, is that a bad thing? It's never a bad thing. And staying away from the thought process of, oh, they're just volunteers. We don't have to worry about them. They're giving their time for free. And staying away from anyone can do this job, right? We could grab someone off the street and do this job. Is chopping carrots or packing meals in a kitchen rocket science? No, but you want them to feel like their work has value. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So let's go into groups again, and 2 or 3 people maybe. And let's talk about any barriers you think you might have, organizational barriers to recognition. Are there any organizational barriers to giving positive feedback and recognition to your volunteers? If so, what are those barriers? And then we'll talk about how we can overcome them after that.
And Danielle, how many minutes would you like them to be in?
Let's do 5 again. So, all right, so let's talk about what barriers are you all experiencing? Either put in the chat or unmute yourself and just say, what are the biggest barriers that you're finding when it comes to recognition?
Well, we probably don't have a volunteer appreciation program established. And that could be because of, the staffing that, adding that to whose plate to initiate that, and or the funding to what would we do in this case, or how we would do that. And the interesting thing and the most beautiful thing in this topic today is that we actually have one of our volunteers in our group today. So it would be ideal to kind of pick her brain and see, what would RCN, how could RCN improve in this space?
Great. I don't want to put him on the spot.
Oh, Cindy, you are a stinker. Oh, well, I did already mention in our other group that I am thanked all the time and appreciated all the time, and I just feel fortunate to be in such a nice spot. We're very much appreciated. Yeah.
Great.
How's Cindy? That's not very good, but I do like t-shirts.
There you go.
But there we have the budget issue.
Yes, the budget. There's always the budget, but I'm going to give you some ideas some cheap ideas, because it does not have to cost a lot of money. It does not. There's many ideas that you can do that are really cheap. So, but I want to, some of these others, staffing. What does miscommunication with staff mean? If you don't mind, Ellen.
No, I tried doing like a volunteer lunch at one point in time, and there was just a huge miscommunication, and so it ended up getting canceled like the night before after I had invited everybody. It was just a nightmare.
Oh no.
But and that was probably, it was on both sides, so I was at fault too. But
okay. And what about buy-in from upper management? They're like, no, we don't want to spend money on that. Or
yeah, just making them see the importance of doing these volunteer recognition and stuff.
So maybe you can bring some of this and the research to them.
Yes.
In your handouts and say, listen, this is directly related to retention. If we want to keep people to stay, we have to put a little bit of time and money towards this.
Yes.
And what does, I'm sorry, I've never worked with people in recovery, so this is a little bit of learning for me too, but volunteers that are in different places of recovery, what does that mean when it comes to recognition? If you don't mind sharing, Christy.
I don't mind sharing. Can y'all see me? Okay. So we have different participants we have a lot of our volunteers that are come in from.
Oh, you're on mute. Shoot. Can you unmute yourself? Can we unmute her?
There, we're unmuted. Unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Did y'all hear any of it or no?
No.
Okay, it's okay. So I'm with Thriving United in Midland, Texas, and we have a lot of volunteers. A majority of our volunteers come from drug court, and they're on probation and this, that, and the other. I was one of them, still am. But from that, we also have volunteers that just want to come in and help out within the community and see what we're about and help others that are struggling. And so from that, just showing the different ones appreciation But I do think that the gift card idea is a great idea. And there's certain ones that do a little more, because sometimes we'll have people that come in and they'll only want an hour. So I was even thinking about making it a minimum of 4 hours. So it'd be worth our time and their time as well. I hope I answered your question.
It's smart because the ROI is important too, right? You're putting a ton
Very
of
much
time into
so.
someone that comes in for an hour. I think you can put, but just remember also that when you do put commitments, time commitments or requirements, that can also sometimes be a barrier to who can and can't do that. Just keeping that in mind. But okay, so let's move on to key concept 3. And again, I will go over some ideas shortly. Okay, recognition can take a wide range of forms, including formal and informal. So on handout number 5, if you just want to get that out or bring it up on your computer and look at it. Let's go to the next slide. Types of volunteer recognition: learning, personal growth, sharing impact, social or network building, personal acknowledgement or gift, community or media recognition, philanthropic, corporate or workplace, and resume building, promotion. So it's useful to look at these different types and try to imagine how they might fit into your particular situation. Just take a few minutes. It's going to be silent here, so it doesn't need to be awkward because everyone will be looking at the handout. And just look at that handout and take a few minutes to complete the worksheet. We'll give you 2 or 3 minutes and check the recognition that you're already doing, and then check what you might want to try. Just take a few minutes and look at that. I'm going to fill up my water. I will be back in 2 minutes and we will talk about this. Okay. All right. Does anyone want to share as far as something they might want to try to do that they're not doing quite yet?
I highlighted several. Sharing impact, I highlighted sharing impact, personal acknowledgement or gift. I highlighted formal recognition and community awareness.
Great. Great. Anyone else want to share? Okay, let's go on to types of recognition, some examples. So there's the learning and personal growth, which I've already talked about with you all. It's very common for people to do recognition around National Volunteer Appreciation Week, which is in April, and then not do it the rest of the year. It's like the 1 week. But I think it's also good to do for birthdays, anniversaries, if you have a way of tracking that. Volunteers tend to naturally reevaluate their volunteer situation 6 months into their opportunity, and then on their anniversary, and then yearly on their anniversaries. Do I still want to continue to do this? So to hit them on their anniversary is usually helpful sometimes. And then maybe specific holidays. I talked about learning and personal growth, making sure you're doing the training ahead of time or right at the beginning of their opportunity, but then to do boosters throughout, as far as, oh, you know, now we're experiencing this, or with COVID, I was doing a lot of different trainings about what our clients might be experiencing and why we needed everyone to wear a mask no matter what when you're at delivery, because some of our clients couldn't get, not because of choice, they couldn't get vaccinated because of their meds that they're on, or the disease that they're experiencing. Okay, next slide. Impact statements. So posting these or sending them in a newsletter. And there's a couple different ways to do it. Here are some examples. So thank you for reading and donating books to children in our care. 2001 study by Newman found a sharp contrast between low and middle income neighborhoods when it came to being able to buy children's book. In a middle income community, thanks to plentiful bookstores, 13 books for each child were available. So middle income, 13 books per child in the home. In contrast, there was only one age appropriate book for every 300 children in a community of concentrated poverty. So this is not only impact, but also some education. So you can imagine if you're middle income, you have 13 books, you're reading a lot more, you're hearing a lot more words. Where one age appropriate book for every 300 people, it's pretty impactful. Because of your hard work, we saved over $3,000 in expenses. Because of your help, 100% of children in our care were offered 3 healthy meals a day. Because of volunteers, see, these are from, I used to work at the Greater Minneapolis Crisis Nursery, and so these are some from then. Because of volunteers, 100% of children we served were tucked in at night. That's more of a little sweet one, right? That makes people go, oh. Because of volunteers, 100%, oh, that's twice. Wow, okay, that's good to know. The next slide. Some more impact statements. Oh, these didn't translate very well. Huh, okay, so the one on the left is actually a sheet I would post at the volunteer check-in station. And there like over 2,000 volunteers walked through the doors in the past year. How many FTEs we had that year. There's a couple call outs for anniversaries for 15-year anniversaries. How many hours they gave. And then Cook for Kids, how much money they saved us and how many meals they cooked. And then on the right, there's just some what volunteers were saying about their experience. So just sharing other perspectives also. And then personal acknowledgement, next one. Some ideas for personal acknowledgement. We actually have volunteers that make these cards on the left. They're beautiful and they're sweet, and we send them to volunteers for, if I hear, oh, I can't be in today, I'm feeling sick. Oh, get well card to them, or I broke my ankle or something, or someone goes over and above, you get a You Rock card, or, oh, I'm gonna be a grandma next week. All those types of things, me and my staff listen for those little things and send them cards, and they are, oh, volunteers are always just blown away that we are listening. So now we're, and you know, my mom died, we send a sympathy card, or I can't come in, and a lot of times we get it from people canceling, like, oh, I can't come in, I got to do this, and we'll send them a card. We also had master gardeners come in and this was at the crisis nursery, but we had them, they planted a bunch of hydrangeas. And then we would give them to volunteers. We'd cut them in the morning and give them to volunteers on certain special days. And then this one again is a kid focus, but we have kids make art and then just write on them and take a picture and email it to them. That's pretty cheap, but they can tell that, and you can use it over and over and over. You use it for 3 years if you wanted, but it's just another way to be creative on very little money. And then there's more formal recognition. Major values of formal recognition: building community spirit among volunteers. It's fun for them to see each other outside their volunteer experience and to meet other like-minded people that are supporting the same mission. Building community spirit. Okay, wait, sorry. Publicly recognizing volunteers. Some people really like that. Attracting other volunteers to join if they can bring a friend, and reinforcing the mission and organization. Next. So cautions in formal recognition. So I think it's an opportunity that some people really enjoy, but be careful because it shouldn't be the only thank you. You shouldn't be like, I'm doing one gala a year and that's our big thank you. Those little daily ones are really important too. No personal presentations, more costly. There is more cost involved. And some volunteers hate that. Like, why are you spending so much money? I'm volunteering to help you save money. And now you're spending so much money to say thank you. And some people are just not interested in that type of thing anymore. Let's see, let me make sure I have all. Yeah. Next slide. All right. So when do you recognize your volunteers? Times for recognition: their first day. Maybe you give them a t-shirt or a button or a name tag or something. Daily or weekly, monthly or yearly, special occasions, during a certain project. If it's a big project, like we send out what we call blizzard boxes every year, and it's a big to-do. It's just so that if we can't deliver for any reason because of snow, we're based in Minnesota, so sometimes the snow keeps us away from delivery. They have shelf-stable food, so it's an extra delivery for everyone, and shelf-stable food tends to be heavier because it's cans and stuff like that. So it's kind of a big deal. So we'll do something, you know, some little gift for our blizzard box deliverers. Upon completion of a big project, when volunteers leave the organization, when they didn't expect it, so a surprise, but really all the time. There's a website in your handouts that lists special days of the year that you could recognize volunteers that might make sense for you. Let's see, next. And remembering that people do evaluate on their anniversary. So that's a big one. I think that's an important one. Using social media for recognition: post a volunteer of the month or featured volunteer. Remember, I usually talk to volunteers before doing this. Like, we really want to recognize you for this on social media. Are you comfortable with it? Some people are not. Some people aren't even on social media. So make sure that it's okay with them before you broadcast this everywhere. Post pictures of volunteers doing great work. We actually have on our waiver that we will be taking pictures and always sharing with the community. So to let us know if you're not comfortable. Thank easily, often, and everywhere. If appropriate, invite volunteers to contribute, encourage volunteers to engage and share the posting so it gets out to more people, kind of like the ripple effect. Share updates with permission and according to the policies of your organization. All right, key concept number 4. Recognition can be creative and fun to give and receive. Couple other ideas for you. Let's go to the next slide. So this was This one is from my former place. I think the next one is from where I work now. So you can see on the left, there's a volunteer check-in station. So it's the first thing they do when they came to the crisis nursery was check in. And there on the upper left, there's all the birthdays for the month. Happy birthday to these people. Then there's special thanks with stars. So it was like, oh, thanks for helping with this event. Thank you for doing Cook for Kids. Thank you, and special people that helped with those things. Then there is a wish list, which isn't really recognition, but it is bringing them into the fold and feeling like part of a community. And then always news, volunteer news. What's new in the volunteer community? What are we doing? What is what are we doing within our organization? And then those impact statements right below that. If you go down, there's a little treat with Tootsie Pops or Lifesavers or anything you can do with a little pun. There's lots of funny things out there. Invitations to events down at the very bottom, and then left is name tags. And on the name tags, I've done this everywhere I've worked, but for example, let's see if I can do this. Do the name tag, like there's the logo, name tag, and then how they volunteered since 2010. That is also a conversation starter for people like, oh my gosh, you've been here for 11 years, you've been here for 20 years, you've been here for, oh, you're brand new, you know, another part of recognition. And then to the right of that was all these shelves that I didn't really know what to do with at first, but then I started taking pictures of volunteers doing interesting things or different things, so that also a way to advertise, like, wait, what's that person doing? That looks fun. Oh, well, we have farms out here that volunteers can volunteer at our open farms or urban farms. We had a 20-year plaque. So once you hit 20 years, you got your name on a plaque. And we had even a way to recognize volunteer ideas is we had a suggestion feedback box that they could just anonymously put ideas in. It's another way for them to feel value. And even having like hand sanitizer, or up on the right, you can see we made stickers and just stuck them on hand sanitizers that say volunteers are the heart of Open Arms. It's really easy and simple and not too expensive. And so our delivery drivers, we give our delivery drivers these when they go out for delivery, and just ask them to hand sanitize between each, but it's also personalized a little bit. Next page. We took a picture of our staff, and then we just made these puns and made a card out of it and sent it. So we send it, well, this one is a 10-year anniversary card, but we send it for lots of things. All you have to do is change the inside, grab some cardstock, and then print these out as you need them. And they're just fun. And a picture of everyone on the team. At the very top, we have merchandise. A lot of people don't, but we do have merchandise like t-shirts and stuff people can buy, hats and tank tops, and sometimes spa stuff. And we'll give volunteers a discount. Maybe during Volunteer Appreciation Week, you get 50% off. If we buy gifts for volunteers, we try to make them local. Like there's local honey, Minnesota honey, that we gave them little. People really appreciate that we are supporting local businesses. We have a bakery on site. I know we're very lucky, although my waistline might say otherwise. So we give volunteers fresh made cookies. If you can do volunteer t-shirts, it's a great way to recognize volunteers, but also so everybody knows who a volunteer is. And again, those name tags with how long they've been here. Or been at the organization. So these are all ideas. Some cost more, some aren't doable if you don't have a bakery. I get that. But some of them can be very, very affordable also. We also offer pronoun pins, which we have I'll tell you, the best investment is a button maker. Because not only do we make, name tags out of buttons, right? We make, during Volunteer Appreciation Week, button stuff is really, the button maker might be a little expensive at first, but you can use it forever. And the button actual stuff is really affordable. So like volunteers are the heart of Open Arms. All staff wear that during Volunteer Appreciation Week. Or you volunteers are the heart and soul of Open Arms. We wore that over a week. During Pride, we gave volunteers if they wanted to, and our staff wore our logo in that. We have pronoun pins. So we use pins for a lot of different recognition, which is fun and kind of gets people in the mood of whatever is going on. Okay, so next slide. So work in a group and list out what is the most creative volunteer recognition idea that you've tried and seen, or something you're thinking about doing. Let's go into small groups, a little bit bigger, maybe 3 or 4 people for this one. And choose someone on your team to share a few of them. Pick 2 or 3 that you want to share, because then we can get ideas from each other. Let's do another 5 minutes. Plus, I'm running out of ideas. I need ideas, people. Wonder if we should did you already do the amount of minutes? Okay.
I can add more if you want.
I would
more.
add, maybe let's do like 7 minutes. I feel like this is a fun one to talk about.
That sounds good. So they'll get their, let's see, they'll get their 60-second warning, and then I'll add 2 more minutes to that.
Hey, Wendy, I got your email with the, oh, I suppose I can wait. It's still recording.
All right, they just got their 60-second warning to come back. And everyone should be back now.
All right. So let's share. Who wants to go first? What is the most creative recognition idea that you've tried, seen, or thinking of trying?
I can go.
Great.
So one of the things, my organization, we're going to be doing some remodeling towards the end of this year, and we're putting in a cafe. So one of the things we're thinking about doing is, we're not sure exactly like what we're going to sell yet, but like naming like the different drinks or sandwiches or pastries or whatever, like after kind of like star volunteers and staff members. So like a drink would be called like the Norris or the Mary. You know, and that also kind of like appeals to people's egos to have something, you know, permanently on a menu.
Yeah.
And then our
Great.
group also talked about, you know, including volunteers like in trainings, you know, in some staff meetings, just because, you know, it helps them to feel important. And so many volunteers, you know, come in, you know, wanting to learn more, you know, and really wanting to get their feet wet. So like also including them in, you know, the training opportunities that we offer to staff so that they can develop their professional skills.
Yes, that is a great one. We do that too with certain trainings. Extending it to volunteers is really successful. That's a great idea. Anything else?
Well, so we're here in Colorado, and a lot of my volunteers, when I interview them, they say they enjoy hiking and stuff. So I'm gonna be organizing a hiking day on a day that the office is closed, and we'll provide water and snacks, maybe even lunch. I'm still developing it, but we want to do it within the next month. So
That is awesome. That is super awesome. How many volunteers do you think will show up?
they all say they like hiking. So I have about 15 to 20 that are active. So,
That's awesome.
and maybe I can pull in some of the ones that kind of fell off during COVID and stuff. So
Yeah, I love that idea. And maybe you all can have matching t-shirts or matching masks or something. That's cool. I love that. Who else wants to share? One more person. Who's going to be brave? Okay, we'll move on. All right, thank you for sharing. So key principles for successful recognition of volunteers in review. Place volunteer in roles most suitable for his or her or their motivations and talent. So making that fit, so it's a win-win. Recognition must be meaningful to the recipient. So finding out asking what, how they like to be recognized. Formal awards. If you do anything formal, it should feel sincere and authentic. Volunteer recognition should be timely. So if you're celebrating a big thing, that a big project they did, if you say thank you 3 months later, is not as meaningful than doing it right away. Same with when I hear little things that are going on with my volunteers, and my mom died, or I broke my foot or whatever. If I send something 3 months later, it's a little less meaningful. So trying to make it timely. Same with anniversaries or birthdays. Recognition can be spontaneous and personal also. So I think it's good to have a loose plan of like, this is what we do yearly, this is what we do quarterly, monthly, weekly. But then you also, I think that you can't just stick to that and never do it any other time. It also has to be spontaneous as things happen also. Okay, any questions about recognition before we move on to retention? No? Okay, so retaining volunteers. All right, so let's in the chat. Let's do the next slide. What does retention mean to your organization? When you think about retention and how long you want volunteers to stay, how would you measure it? Is it, maybe you have a commitment, like we ask for at least a 3-month commitment. And if they make that 3 months, that's 100% retention. Maybe it's the longer, the better. I know that we're going away from that, but some organizations are still in that. So think about how you measure retention and success when it comes to retention, and put in the chat how you measure it. I'll tell you, we have a tough time measuring it because we take one-time volunteers and we don't have a commitment yet. We try to get rid of as many barriers as possible so we don't have a commitment. So that can be difficult. We take community service volunteers. So sometimes they only have like 6 hours they need to be done. We do same with service learning volunteers. Sometimes they just need 1 hour for a class. So how do you measure retention? Put it in the chat, please. We don't really measure retention or measure it as this at this point. We are in the same boat as needing short-term volunteers for special projects, and then volunteers who are trained peer coaches that we want to retain as long as possible so that they serve as consistency. Yeah, I think it can be tricky to actually measure retention as a whole. It's easier to kind of break it down into groups. And does anyone have anything that they think is working well to retain volunteers? From all the modules you have attended? Okay, consider the time it will take to complete the project and consider if the volunteer stays until the completion of the project. That's a great way to do it. Will they stay the entire time, which would be 100%, or drop out halfway point, 50%? Yeah, and what does that tell you about that project? Like, did you not keep them engaged? Maybe you didn't prepare them well enough if they do drop out, you know? We retain volunteers by including them in programs, and they have ownership. Ownership is pretty important for a lot of people. And sometimes ownership can be difficult though, because we have a volunteer at our front desk that has so much ownership that when you come in, she's like, this needs to be done, and this needs to be done, and this needs to be done. So that can be tricky sometimes, but all right, anyone else want to share?
So we give them control of a volunteer run event every month. We give them a budget of $100 and they get to decide what they're doing, get each other involved. And so it's very volunteer focused. They get to run it. We just provide the money and the venue if they need us to.
Wow, that's awesome. That's super cool. I love that. Anyone else? Well, let's move on to key concept 5 then. To increase retention, invest in practices that enrich the volunteer experience and create an organizational culture that values volunteers. I can't tell you how important the organizational culture is, that you get staff on board with this appreciation. So it's not just coming from you all the time as the volunteer leader, but everyone in the organization shows that informal appreciation. Maybe the formal appreciation does come from you, but at least the daily and informal and spontaneous thank yous and recognition come from everyone. Because once you get people to do that, it does become a culture and a community. And remembering that, once again, that retention does not mean keeping people forever. It's keeping them as long as, one, the commitment is, or as long as they are engaged. So it is a win-win for both. So next slide, volunteer retention is understanding motivation. So knowing why volunteers are coming to you. A lot of times it is support of a mission. Designing positions. So if they know what they're getting into, and I have actually volunteers sign off on their positions so that I can go back when they do something that's not within the position. I'm like, remember when you signed off on this and this part. Managing risk and safety, interviewing and matching, especially for those more intense volunteer opportunities that you need more information about the volunteers to do and their skills. Recruiting volunteers, orienting and training them, supervising them, and recognizing them. These all lead to retention. However, studies show that recognizing is and appreciating is the most linked to retention. What other ones on this list do you think are important besides recognizing? What other ones are the most important? Anyone want to put in the chat? I personally would say designing positions so people know what they're getting into. Understanding motivation is always good. Interviewing and matching is huge. Someone comes in and they're like, yes, I want to work in the kitchen, and I put them at the farm or I put them at delivery. They're not going to be happy and they're for sure not going to stay. And supervising, having somebody to go to if they have questions, feeling like they have a go-to person, I think is important also. All right, next slide. Oh, designing positions has been one of my biggest takeaways from this series. Oh, yeah, good. It's important. It's an important one. I mean, I try to have position descriptions even for the simplest job, so that when people come in, they know what they're getting into. And there's nothing worse than going and having a picture in your head and then you're doing something totally different or not feeling needed at all, really. So, okay, volunteer engagement practices and retention activities. So a study done by the Urban Institute found that these three are the top. And this is all, there's more in depth in your handouts, but number one, recognition activities. Number two, training and professional development for volunteers. And like I said, especially in the beginning, so they know who they're working with and their experience. It changed my retention at the crisis nursery. People were, let me give you an example. So when I worked at the Greater Minneapolis Crisis Nursery, we worked with kids that were traumatized and were experiencing crisis. And so they were kids 6 and under, and a lot of them, think of a nursery, a lot of them were babies. So people, when I started, people were coming in, I can't wait to rock babies. That's what they were thinking. But instead what they were getting, and that's how they were advertising it. So we were getting so many applicants. I want to rock babies. I want to rock babies. And then when I got there, I was like, So you're working with traumatized kids that will hit you, spit on you, swear at you, and sometimes you get a rack a baby. It was not the norm. It was sometimes you get a rack a baby. So changing that, reframing that expectation of volunteers changed. One, I had to start recruiting volunteers because it was scarier to people. But once I did change that, I got a better fit of volunteers. And so they were staying longer instead of going, oh yeah, I'm gonna rock a baby. And then it wasn't that at all. So training and professional development for volunteers and screening them and matching to assignments and finding that fit, which we've already talked about. Okay. So let's talk about, next slide, why volunteers leave. More than 1/3 of those who volunteer 1 year do not donate their time the next year at any nonprofit. That adds up to an estimated $38 billion lost in labor. So why is this? Failing to match volunteer skills with the assignments that we give them, failing to recognize their contributions, COVID, not providing a welcoming and inclusive culture environment, not measuring the values of volunteers, the value of their time and talent, failing to train and invest in volunteers and staff, and training staff for working with volunteers, right? I remember when I first started in volunteer engagement, staff would be like, why do you expect us to treat volunteers? I swear to God, we treat volunteers better than staff. Well, we do treat them slightly differently and it might seem better, but because they're not paid. As a staff member, we have an agreement. You come in and you get paid and you do this job. As a volunteer, we have a different kind of agreement. Please come in, do this job, and we'll super appreciate you. And then failing to provide that strong leadership and someone to go to lead the volunteers. COVID is an interesting one though, because I also found that if you brought, what I found successful is bringing the volunteer along on the journey of unknowing. And so we would just keep them in the loop of what we were thinking and how we were slowly going to change this and try this. And we never know what's going to happen, but we appreciate your support through it. I know a lot of volunteers gave me feedback that they really appreciated feeling a part of the process and knowing what was happening during a time when nobody knew what changes were going to happen. And we made quite a few changes, some that we still are using and well, right now, but we may keep for forever. Well, not forever, but for time being. Okay, next slide. From the volunteers' perspective. So, whoops. There we go. So MAVA led a focus group for boomers, and we know there are a lot of boomers out there in 2014, and found that these were important for them to stay, to retain boomers. Having the right volunteer manager is crucial. The priority as a volunteer manager who is a good communicator, responsive, and makes volunteers feel valued. To create an organizational culture that embraces, values, and respects volunteers by treating volunteers like partners or colleagues. They want to be a part of the mission. They want to be a part of the community that you're building within your organization, not an add-on, right? And volunteers want to feel valued, needed, and that their work is meaningful and that they are making impact. You have a handout on this whole focus group with more details, but I find it very, very fascinating. Next slide. So, develop a plan. Not quite this one before. Develop a plan to improve retention. So ask yourself, what would be good retention? What would that be? We talked about this in the beginning, but in your area of work, what would that be? And how can you communicate that? Like in a story. I think people respond to stories more than just numbers. Measure your current volunteer retention, the average length of the average time a volunteer stays, and or the percent of volunteers that reach a certain benchmark of time, such as 3 years. How many of your volunteers have hit 3 years? And do they stay for the commitment that they signed up for? What percentage stay for that commitment? If you have a commitment, we don't here, but if you do, how many of the volunteers stay that long? And what does the story tell you? If your retention number is really low, why might that be? And if your retention is really high, maybe you could make the commitment a little longer, or something. You know, what are these numbers telling you? Because, right, statistics don't tell the human experience, but they do tell the story. Develop a plan on how to improve retention by thinking through these different stories, and set a goal for retention each of the next 3 years and measure that progress. But maybe it's next year, maybe it's the next 6 months, whatever works for your organization. And again, the goal is not to keep people forever. The goal is to keep them as long as they're engaged. Is there a too long? I would argue yes. When people are no longer engaged, they can start to be toxic and start being negative and spreading that negativity. Okay. Oh, geez, we got ahead on time suddenly. All right, so let's take a few minutes. And I want you to jot down 3 or 4 ideas that you include in your retention plan, whether it's how you're going to measure it, talk about it, how to tell your story. Take a couple minutes, and then we'll go into breakout groups to talk about your plan with each other. I want you to not only talk about your retention plan, but anything else that you want to share, or anything together that you learned today that you're going to take back with you. And we'll chat about it afterwards. So we'll give them like 2 or 3 minutes to jot down their plan, and then another 7 to talk about their retention plan, how they're going to measure it, if it's even worth measuring. Maybe it's not for you, and why is that? And anything you're going to take away from this today.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and open up these breakout rooms. We'll see you back in a bit.
All right. Is everyone back? No, not quite yet. All right. All right, cool. So let's chat about what you talked about. Share with us ideas or what's your takeaway or what you chatted in your groups.
Hey, it's Sarah again. So I kind of hijacked our conversation in the group. So I just want to apologize to Jasmine and Laura. So I told those ladies, so retention really isn't an issue for us. I have a lot of places to pull from. So I do the Recovery Coach Academy, that people love that. And then they're interested in volunteer opportunities. We have the Crisis Intervention Center. So a lot of the folks that are coming through there are interested in volunteering. And then of course we have on-site services for SUD and mental health here. So I have a lot of people interested, but the thing is I'm trying to create roles for volunteers at our crisis center, but a current and active client isn't going to be appropriate to be providing services at the crisis center. So I'm trying to find the balance here, so to speak, and navigate that.
Interesting. So then are you intentionally recruiting? Like whether it's social, like ideally, if you could pick the perfect volunteer for that position, what experience would they have? Or what kind of person would they be? Or
So I would say this would be maybe a person that has at least a year, maybe 2 in recovery already, kind of maybe already employed, but exploring other career options. Somebody that's dependable, of course. I think that would be you know, fair to say. I'm not sure then. I think if I can, I actually developed volunteer phases with different levels. Like we have level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So ideally those would be my level 4s and level 5s who have had a little bit of experience in recovery, or at least in or around it, if that makes sense. But I'm not really finding that I have a whole lot of those kind of folks that are still connected to the recovery community, if that makes sense.
so that's interesting. So
Yeah.
after a year or so of recovery, they move on.
Yeah.
Do
They
you have
move on,
access
or
to
they
that information though, that you could recruit from a pool of people that were there 2 years ago or something? And
You know, that's actually a really good idea. So I'm going to follow up with the program manager over at the center, because I think they
it might be a great
working-
way to get them re-involved. And
Yeah, because I know they were trying to come up with like an aftercare or follow-up plan to follow
Yeah.
people. So you know what? I'm going to look into
you
that.
can
Thank
work
you.
with them on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah.
No, really.
Anyone else? One more?
I'll share.
Great, thank you.
We talked about, or I shared with the group on how to, how our volunteer services for tours, telephone, online, text, recovery services, how we've broken it up over the past 3 weeks, 3-4 weeks now. And that was to get one, to establish a director of volunteer services, or somebody who's leading the volunteer services, and then allow her to work with and recruit individuals to become volunteers in our space, and then to break up the work so that it doesn't fall heavy on just one or two people, but where it's distributed, the same work, but it's distributed among the group of volunteers. And every day they can take on a little bit of the calling and texting and reaching out to those that have requested tours. And so I think that for our retention plan right now, that's what we're working towards, is to be able to retain the individuals and not lose them, or not burden them with like the feel of having all the work on them.
Right. Great. Well, thank you all. Does anyone have any questions? I'll tell you, I love doing these MAVA trainings and talking to like-minded as far as volunteer leaders. So thank you for having me. I feel like we're really lucky to have to be in these positions where we get to connect people that want to help to those that need it. I feel like it's pretty unique. And so thanks for having me. I'm always open for questions if you need anything. I know Chris, you wanted a couple minutes at the end here. So if are there any questions before I hand it over?
We're good. I don't want to cut anybody off from a question, so. Well, I'll just send out a reminder. We will have our next Ask the Expert session where you can spend some one-to-one time on August 11th, so next week. And again, that's available on the landing page, so we will send out a reminder of that. And then I'm going to post right now, I'm going to share a slide. So if you can get out your smartphone, if you have one, and I'll also put a link in the chat. But if you have a smartphone, we have a fancy QR code here that you can just point your phone at, and it'll create a pop-up window, and you click on that pop-up window, and it's about a 2 to 3 minute evaluation. And this is an evaluation of the entire series to date. So, and I'm going to copy and paste this link and put it into the chat as well. If I can find my chat, where if you want to copy and paste it and do it on your desktop, that is fine too. So there you go. And again, because this training comes to you at no cost, this information goes directly back to SAMHSA, who's our funder, and lets them know that you found this training valuable, and you learned a lot. And so they keep funding different technical assistance centers like mine. And then I will send out the link in a follow-up email as well. So as we head into our last 6 minutes here, and I know you've covered a lot of this, but for just a takeaway, Danielle, I'll put you on the spot a little bit, but pretty open-ended, is what would say one or two of the most important takeaways about recruiting, retaining volunteers, would you say?
Or recognizing, you mean?
Recognizing, yes.
I think building recognition into your organization, so it doesn't only come from the same people, is key to volunteers really like seeing like, oh, like if they're walking in one area, they're in where maybe it's not the volunteer engagement area, and nobody says anything to them, right? So in really immersing everyone into a culture of volunteer appreciation makes a big difference. I have noticed, I have worked in a few different organizations, and this one, when I came in, it had that culture and you could feel it right away. And but it's also important to get that, is to also educate some of the staff on this stuff, right? Your staff on why it's important. Why is volunteer recognition important? And retention, I think retention means different things to every different organization, right? Some organizations won't even measure retention because they're short term. Like, we just need you to come once, like Feed My Starving Children here in Minnesota. They are episodic. They take tons of people and they pack food and they go through. They're not trying to keep them forever. They're just, the more people one time is great for them. So finding what works for you in your organization when it comes to retention. And in my organization, only certain opportunity areas retention works in, others they don't. So
with our RCOs, we have ongoing programs like telephone recovery support programs where we want to retain that volunteer because we invest a lot in training them and they build relationships with the people that they're calling. And so to have high turnover in that area is a heavy lift.
Yes.
And on the flip side, we do our annual walks for recovery, which is a perfect opportunity for that one-time volunteer to come in, show up at the walk, host a booth or, check people in or do that where they can feel good about like, I showed up for this big event. It's very public. And now I'm going to wait till next year to come back. But they might just be, you might retain them though on that annual basis as well.
Right. Well, and if you have them in a more invested position where they're helping maybe plan it or they're on a committee or something, you might really want to retain them. So because of the institutional knowledge of how it works.
Yes.
So, and if you are finding there are certain programs within your organization that you're having a hard time keeping volunteers, you need to look at why.
Yeah.
And maybe, sending out a survey to people that are quitting all the time. Once they quit, like exit survey, let me know why, what could we have done better and find out. Maybe it was, they didn't feel appreciated. Maybe they didn't have enough to do or whatever. And you'll see a theme,
Well, and I will send out to everyone too, just on the topic of surveys, when I do the follow-up email, we did 3 sessions on survey design and encouraging survey participation. And so again, if you're just on another note, you're thinking about, well, yeah, we want to send something out to our volunteer workforce, there's an additional support there for, well, how do I design this survey and what should be the contents and how do I get people to fill it out?
Yes, I'll tell you, when it comes to surveys, making it easy is the best because they're more willing to fill it out if it's just easy, check a box and not too difficult.
Yes.
But and what questions you're asking, remember to ask, why am I asking this question? What am I trying to get to?
Yes. Well, thank you, Danielle.
Thank you all.
Hope you all had enjoyed your time today and thank you for spending your time with us. I will send out a follow-up email and hopefully we see you on the 11th at the Ask the Expert session.
Great.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.